these sensors that are everywhere. We mentioned in passing that you walk by the street and a light turns on. Right? At nighttime, if you walk by, there's a motion sensor. It turns on the light. So I said, best to go over to the other side of the street. But what happens when the other side of the street, he also puts on a motion sensor? And what happens? Thank you, sir. What happens when? It's all right. What happens when in the house there's a motion sensor because you've got a burglar alarm? And what happens when everywhere in the street there's not only sensors but there's things activated? We mentioned also you go into a hotel room nowadays. Many of the hotels it saves a lot of money. People forget to turn the lights off, so they have an automatic switch that turns the lights off, and then when you walk in the room, it automatically turns on. You don't have any electric switches. Okay, that's fine to save money for during the week. What happens on Shabbat? On Shabbat, we don't want to be activating any electronics. Whether it's the Raita, the Rabbana, it's definitely prohibited. So what do we do in such circumstances? So let's see what Rav Melamed says. But I'll just tell you, outside, in general, the standard approach is we avoid it, right? If at all possible. Just like I said, you have to buy a special fridge which turns off the sensors of all these different types. And if you can avoid it, we avoid it. But what if you can't? And it's becoming harder and harder to avoid it because they're everywhere. Sensors are being built not only in the refrigerators, but they're being built into every light switch at some point. And what's that called? The technology of things, or something like that. There's a whole. It's okay.
I'm sorry.
There's a whole industry that's, we're going to have sensors in every little thing that even in our cups. And of course, a while ago they had, when you buy a container of, let's say, washing liquid, the container itself will know when it gets empty, and the sensor, page 53, the sensor will know when it gets empty and automatically send an order of a refill. These things exist already, and so this is a problem. What do we do with this automation? Let's see. There is in general we try to avoid it, but as I said, because it's coming more and more difficult, there actually are opinions. I don't know if Rabbi Melamed brings them or not. There is an opinion of the big Torah scholars and physicists who are also big Torah scholars, and they say that if you are just going about your daily business, you're not doing you're not even moving your finger one iota for the specific purpose of activating anything, it's you can go about your daily business. You don't have to think about these activations which happen, even if you know that they're going to happen, because that's not what you're doing. You're not making any specific movement which can in any way be connected with purposeful action. We learned the principles of that has to be purposeful action. And using all the principles we learned yesterday, they're still on the board. Right? Even if it's never going to happen, if it's only a rabbinic prohibition, there's a movement to say that you're allowed to live your life normally, whether or not the sensors are going to be turning things on or not. You don't pay attention to that. You don't have to care about it. But it's a minority opinion as of now. Who knows whether the matters will change as our lives change and technology changes. But let's see the first approach, especially if you're going to believe that using electricity is a Torah law, then you're going to have to be even more careful about activating anything right? Even if it doesn't have an element, a heating element or a filament, just using electricity. There are some opinions that it's a Torah prohibition, so you have to be more machmir. But we'll see what happens. The halacha, what's the word halacha come from? What word does that remind you of? Lalechet, to go. So it's something that develops. It's walking. It's the halacha, it gets applied. The principles are eternal. Principles are what was passed down to us. Moshe, to the sages, to the poskim in every generation. But how we apply those and what nuances of the discussion that came out throughout all of our analysis of the principles, how that gets applied, it can change throughout the generations. And that's why, who knows? Who knows what the halacha will be in a couple of years. But the principles, as of now, we're going to learn right now, and the applications as of now, that's what we're going to do now. So we're in chapter 17, section 11. Okay, we're going to learn about automatic doors. Where do you find an automatic door? Right, in a hotel, many times in a hospital. Sometimes you don't have to open the door. You just come close automatically. Even in some stores, right? Just here, yesterday I was in a super farm. You get close to the door, it opens, right? Because there's a little sensor on top. There's an eye, and can you do that? Well, you're not going to walk into a store on Shabbat, but you might want to walk into a hospital. You might want to walk into a public building where there's an automatic door. What do? And that's a situation. The nichale, you want that door to open, right? Even though it's going to happen automatically, and you're just walking, but you want it to happen. Is that allowed? So let's see. The standard approach I told you is that we have to be careful. All right, Ida, why don't you start us out?
One may not approach a door that automatically opens when it senses someone near it. One who does so is viewed as directly triggering the electricity that opens the door. It is immaterial whether the system works through floor sensors, an electric eye, a motor detector, or the like.
Motion
detector or the like. As we have seen in section 2, according to many, including Rav Kook, turning on an electrical appliance is prohibited by Torah law. One who finds himself in a hotel or hospital with automatic doors must find an alternative way to enter the door that does not involve using electricity. If a non-Jew approaches the door in order to enter, the Jew may follow him through.
Take a tramp. Right, come close right after him. He opened the door for himself, but so you can walk into the open door.
But if the person approaching the door is a Jew who does not observe Shabbat, the Shabbat observer may not follow him in because the Shabbat observer may not benefit from the Shabbat desecration of a fellow Jew. Furthermore, when an observant Jew takes advantage of Shabbat desecration and benefits from it, it is considered as a desecration of Hashem's name. Even though some are lenient in this case, it is proper to be stringent. Only under pressing circumstances where there is no alternative may one rely on those who are lenient.
And we don't use other Jews as our Shabbos goys. They're not goys. They're Jews. So even if they don't know about it and are careful about keeping the laws of Shabbat, the laws of Shabbat apply to them. And if they're violating the Shabbat, for you can't benefit from it, even if it's not for you. The fact that the Jew violated Shabbat, you can't benefit from that. We're going to learn that in a separate chapter. But so if there's a non-Jew, so there's no violation. So then you can, hitch a ride. Again, this is the first approach that, if it's going to be activated, even though you're just walking, all you're doing is walking in, it's still a problem because it's going to be activated and it might be a Torah law, so you really have very little flexibility. As I said, there's another approach. I don't think he even brings it in this book, but the standard approach is as follows. We avoid the automatic doors as much as possible. Go ahead.
Doctors and nurses may enter a hospital through an automatic door as their work entails saving lives. Others may then follow them through the door. Ideally, the hospital administration should try to minimize the need for Shabbat desecration and arrange alternative entrances for visitors and staff to enter without activating any electrical devices.
And some hospitals have that. They have a special Shabbat door. Some hotels also, they might maybe the main door that you enter is like a turnstile. You walk through, and the whole doors with windows sort of turns around. Sometimes it's electronic, sometimes it's manual. But if it's electronic, you would want to avoid it on Shabbat. So sometimes they open a side door. There's doors right next to it that they could open. They just, it's a fancier entrance, and maybe protects the hotel from the wind coming in and out. But
even if it's electronic and spinning on its own, like all the time.
Well, that takes us back to the debate about the elevators, right? If your weight is going to influence the motor, then there's room to be concerned. Yes, in most places they have a side door that's open. They open one of those regular doors, and for one day a week they'll have to deal with it. But okay, go ahead. Here, this is the next. Some say, go ahead. Let's see.
Some say that if one unintentionally came close to an automatic door, thus causing it to open, he must remain in place because moving away will cause the door to close.
Stand there the whole Shabbat. I stepped within it, the eyesight of the sensor, and the door opened. But now if I leave, the door's going to close. Now I know that I went too close. How can I step away? Got to stand there.
They maintain that he should wait until a non-Jew arrives and ask the non-Jew to stand near him, at which point he can leave. Afterwards, when the non-Jew leaves as well, the non-Jew will be the one who causes the door to close. However, if remaining in place causes the Jew anguish, he may simply leave, as he is just walking normally and does not care if the door is open or closed. His act of leaving is a psikreshe de lo brought about via drama, which is not forbidden. Even if the person who mistakenly caused the automatic door to open did in fact want to enter, in a time of need, he may still enter, since the malacha was unintentional. In contrast, if he intended for the door to open but forgot and only later remembered that it is forbidden, he should not enter, because one may not benefit from a malacha that was unknowingly, albeit intentionally, performed on Shabbat.
Okay, so you see here he's applying the principles. He's saying if you're leaving, anyways, you're already outside the door. You're not going to benefit from it. Then, if you have to, you can leave, and whatever happens afterwards is nothing that you intended or you care about. There's room to be lenient again. This all goes back to the original discussion we had yesterday: is using electricity. Is it biblically prohibited or rabbinically prohibited? Makes a big difference about how machmir you have to be. Stand there until you can find a non-Jew. Could take an hour. You're late for shul. Or you want to go visit your mother, or whatever it is. Why are you going to the hospital or to the hotel? So, best is to avoid those electronic doors. As I said, there's another opinion, but the standard is we don't take lightly the activation of electronic devices, even though we're going about our regular activities. Let's see the next paragraph. Another. Yosef, you can read 12 for us, please?
When entering a room causes the lights to turn on. One may not enter a room where doing so automatically turns on the lights or air conditioning, while one might claim that he did not intend to turn on the lights or air conditioning by entering the room. The fact is that everyone knows how the system works in such places. This problem is common in hotel rooms and bathrooms. One who stays in such a hotel must make sure that the system is switched off before Shabbat. If he did not take care of this in advance and outside his room when Shabbat begins, he may ask the non-Jew to open the door for him. You should further ask the non-Jew to stay for a bit so that the non-Jew will benefit from the lights or air conditioning, since he is then viewed as having turned them on for his own sake, and the Jew may benefit from them. What if the hotel guest is inside such a room when Shabbat begins? And if he knows that if he leaves, he will cause the lights or air conditioning to shut off. If he can easily stay inside after the Shabbat, or if the non-Jew is due to come shortly to disable the system, it is preferable to wait inside. However, if doing so causes him anguish, he may leave the room or bathroom because the purpose of this system is to save the household money by conserving electricity. The hotel guest does not care about that, so it is a case of Peshkresha de lo Nichale regarding our rabbinic prohibition, since all agree that the prohibition of turning off the lights or air conditioning is rabbinic. When necessary, in such case, one may be lenient. However, as we saw earlier, once the guest has left his room, he will not be able to return to it, because doing so will turn on the lights and air conditioning. The only way for him to enter would be with the help of a non-Jew. Therefore, the proper course of action in this case is to ask a non-Jew who is able to assist him. Then the guest will be able to enter and exit the room as needed.
Right, sometimes I think I was at a hotel. It was not Shabbat, but I did notice that in the middle of the night, the lights went off. Well, the hallway lights, I guess I left the light on in the hallway, in the inside the hotel room. There's, the main room, and then there's like the entranceway, which has its own light. So I figured I'll leave that on at night. After a few hours, in the middle of the night, that light turns off because there's a motion sensor. Now what happens? I get up in the middle of the night. I want to go to the bathroom. The light turns on. So let's say you're there on Shabbat. You can't go to the bathroom because you're going to turn on the hallway light. You have to rely on, okay, I don't really need the light. It's not in my favor. I don't want it. I'm not intending it to happen. It's psik reisha. It's for sure going to happen, but it's lo nichale, and you have to hope that these lights are not an incandescent light bulb. Usually they're not. But we don't usually allow that unless it's for the sake of a mitzvah. Well, it's a mitzvah to go to the bathroom, you have to. But you could see that the problems are just getting more and more. The more these sensors are going to be in every cut. They tell us, I think it's the Internet of Things. That's the term I was looking for. That's an attempt. I don't know how successful it's been, but at some point that every dish that you have will have a little chip in it. And it'll automatically, register when the dish gets emptied, and so on and so forth. The floors we walk on, the doors we open and shut, somewhere they'll be making some kind of statistics about how many times this door was opened. That way we can plan the springs better. Whatever it is, it's called the Internet of Things. That at one point, everything we do is going to be activating so many things. So this law is very, very critical. As I said, the current psak of most rabbis is we have to be aware, and we have to try to turn off all those sensors before Shabbat. When push comes to shove, there is room to be lenient, especially if the door's already been open, you're just leaving, you don't care if it closes or not, or if there's some kind of lo nichale situation, assuming that there's no actual fire being lit or no filament. If it's just electricity, there's different opinions, and you're not doing any specific activity, you're not activating with a button on purpose, you're just going about your daily activities, your regular motions, and you can't be expected to not walk down the street on Shabbat. Some rabbis say, you don't walk on the street on Shabbat. You have to make sure that we have to, I think they're called smart homes, right? The new thing. So there's an organization for halacha and science, and they're giving consulting to construction companies, because the latest is that you're constructing an entire apartment building with many, many sensors in it for the garbage disposal, for the lights, for the heating, air conditioning, everything. And if you want to follow the simple halacha, we have to arrange a reroute or a way to turn that system off for Shabbat, because we don't want to be activating all these sensors and all these different things on Shabbat, even though we're not thinking about it. We know that they're there and they're inevitably going to happen. It's a problem, so this is a big issue. As I said, there is an opinion that is more permissible than what we said here, even more permissible than what it said here. Here too, if it says if you have to, you can ask a non-Jew. If you can't ask a non-Jew, as long as it's lo nichale, that's not your intention. There's room to be lenient. But this opinion that is from Rabbi Novich, his students, primarily, they say that you can be even more lenient than that, and you don't even have to ask them to turn off the system. As long as you're going about your daily business, you're not intentionally trying to activate anything. You can't be that can't be considered to be a malacha, an intentional act that you're doing in violation of the Shabbat. If your action is to walk, your intended action. Anyways, this is, as I said, a major issue, which we'll see what happens in the halacha. If they manage to turn off all the systems, or more and more we rely on perhaps this outlying halachic psak, that it's not a problem. If you look at the section, footnote 12, he relates this idea, and he rejects it, this outlying opinion. He doesn't say it by name, like I just did, but the claim that one may enter a room where the lights and air conditioning will automatically turn on, since one is not interested in this happening, is not legitimate. He says he rejects this reasoning. Part of the reason the system was put into place to begin with was to make one's life easier by relieving him of the need to turn on the lights and air conditioning every time he enters the room. Just because he does not want it to happen on account of Shabbat prohibition does not make this a psik reisha de lo nichale. The other claim is, you're right, it's not a psik reisha de lo nichale, but it's not called an action whatsoever. It's not a malacha that you're doing for the sake of, you're just walking. That's not a designated, action or moving. That's the new claim, which he doesn't even, relate to here. But Bezrat Hashem, we'll see how it. In the meantime, we try to avoid it and speak to the hotel. You have to, when you do book a hotel, if you travel. Who's traveling nowadays? I don't know. It's only one aircraft carrier who's coming into Israel at the moment. But if you do have situations like this, then you try to prepare ahead of time and get a Shabbat key. We talked about it the other day, that some hotels will give you a special manual mechanical key and not use, but he's going to talk about that in entrances and so forth. By the way, though, so there's a little bit more. He does mention it. Here it is. In section 14, the last paragraph on page 57, he talks about walking where you're going to trigger sensors, and he mentions it here. I wonder why he doesn't mention it earlier. I guess because those are sensors not turning on lights. They're just sort of maybe... Interesting, right? He didn't mention it earlier, but he finally does mention that at the end of section 14. But let's continue and see the... yeah.
Translation of Sikh
Okay, so it's on the board still from yesterday. Yesterday was Tuesday, so you missed it. Psik reisha means inevitable, right? Because cut off the chicken's head and it's not going to die. That's the language of psik reisha. They cut off its head. So that's a catchword. It's a phrase for something that's unintended consequence, which is for sure going to happen. So usually we say that it's prohibited because it's inevitable, so you can't claim, I didn't know it was going to happen. If it's for sure going to happen, so you can't claim it's not intentional. So we added yesterday that there's two possibilities. Maybe, even though it's for sure going to happen, if you don't care about it or you don't want it to happen, that's called psik reisha de lo nichale. It's not noach, right? It's for you. It's Aramaic, but it's very similar to Hebrew. That if it's psik reisha, if you want it to happen, then because it's inevitable, even though it's not your primary reason for doing the activity, it's a secondary sort of ramification of your action. That's prohibited according to all opinions. But if it is psik reisha, but it's lo nichale, it sort of tempers it and says, well, it's an automatic consequence, but it's unintentional and it's unwanted. Right? That's lo nichale. It's on. What did I say yesterday? What's the? It's not advantageous to you in any way. If it's not advantageous to you in any way, so then there are some poskim who allow it, especially if it's a rabbinic prohibition. That's what lo nichale means. Okay, so it's always hard to catch up. We cover so much ground in one day here. So, okay, intercoms. Bottom line is. That's okay. We have to deal with this. So, have you ever been to the Kotel on Shabbat? Right, there's security there,
Yeah.
and there's cameras everywhere. Special security cameras. You can see closed circuit TV. There's at all times they're looking. There's somebody dealing with the people and checking their bags. Then there's somebody in the back room who's watching this camera to see if you can see if you have a different angle. And so you can wave. Shabbat. You're being filmed. That the electronics are capturing your every movement, and you're creating this image on the computer screen. Is that allowed? So let's read about it. On page 55, section 13. Stephen, go ahead.
Intercoms, security, monitors, and doorbells at building entrance. Since buildings,
Some
buildings use cross-circuit television (CCTV), in which surveillance cameras transmit images to monitors, a non-Jewish security guard stationed at the entrance keep an eye on the people who come and go by watching the monitors. When people whom the guard recognizes as residents of the building or their guests arrive at the front door, he pushes an electric button that unlocks the door, allowing them to enter. Since this system is beneficial to the Jewish residents and guests of the building, Jews may not stand where his image will be captured on the monitor.
you have to hide from the camera.
Similarly, if a Jew wishes to enter the building, he may not press the intercom button to request that the guard unlock the door for him, since using electricity is prohibited. Therefore, one should make certain that the place where the guard sits is not far from the front door. Then, when a Jew wishes to enter, he can knock on the door while standing out of camera range so that the guard can see him and unlock the door for him. If the non-Jews elect to open it using the electric release button, the Jews may still enter, since it is possible for the non-Jews to open the door manually. If the non-Jews prefer to use the door release button, he is doing so for his own convenience and not for the benefit of the Jews.
Right, this is an interesting principle. We had this discussion just on the Shabbaton a couple of months ago already. The beginning of Zman, remember we went to Kfar Etzion and our listener wanted there to be tablecloth on the tables. We were camping out. And there was a staff there of service people who had the tablecloths for us. So he went over and asked them, come, please, can you get us a tablecloth? So they bring over the roll, it's a big roll, and they cut it off at the end. Wait, cutting it off? We don't cut things on Shabbat. It's a problem of mechatech. Fine, it's not biblically prohibited because you only want one side, not the other, but still, how could you ask the non-Jew to do that for you? So the discussion went as follows. The major principle is whenever you have what about in the kitchen? Also, there was a lot of workers in the kitchen, and surprisingly, they were non-Jewish. Surprisingly, because it's a kibbutz, and usually kibbutz is very proud to have avodah ivrit. But I guess even the economic now, I'm sure there's only Jews working there. But till about a month ago, a lot of the economy is intermixed with the cheap labor of our neighbors who are non-Jews, and so you have the non-Jews. And if you go late at night, you'd see that those dishes were being washed in the dishwasher. We skipped the section about the dishwasher, but that was turned on by a non-Jew, but for the sake of a Jew. So how can you sort of allow the non-Jew to violate the Shabbat on your behalf? We haven't really, we have said a number of times that you're not allowed to ask a non-Jew to do malacha for you. That's a later chapter. We'll get to it. But the answer is very clear, that let's say all I'm asking the non-Jewish waiter or service person to do is I'm asking him to do I want the result. I want the dishes to be clean. Now he has a choice. He can do them by hand. Or can do them with the machine. If he turns on the machine, it's for his own sake. So it's much faster and quicker. Same thing with cutting the tablecloth. He could cut it in a way which is allowed, or he could have left the roll on the table, on the edge of the table, and just given us the tablecloth without cutting it off. He cut it off for his own convenience. So then he can take the roll somewhere else. He didn't have to. He could have left the roll there. He could have covered the table without cutting it at all. So the fact that the non-Jew does certain melachot, as long as they're not for our sake, they're for his own sake. And there is an option for him to do to get the result without violating the Shabbat. So then we can't pin that specific activity that the non-Jew does onto the Jew. I didn't ask him to do that action. I asked him to get the result. The result could have been done without turning on the dishwasher. He could have washed them by hand. Same principle here. That's what he's saying, is that the non-Jew who's going to see you, and he could get up out of his chair, walk over and open the door manually. The fact that he, out of his own convenience, pushes the electronic button, that can't be said that you're forcing him to violate the Shabbat for you, or to, which generally we don't do. Okay, so there's a lot of details here, but the next passage is a little more connected to what I was saying about the kotel. Right, so truth is that in apartment buildings where Jews live, you have to work something out to make sure that you can get in and out of the building without activating the electronics, pushing the intercom. Sometimes it's a little tricky. There are places in the world where there's security in every building. Big condominiums in New York, every building has a security guard there. Usually it's a non-Jewish security guard. You make sure. It's not a lot of Jews in New York too, so make sure he's not Jewish. But as long as you're not forcing him to do the work through the electronics, and he's only doing it for his own convenience with the electronics, then that's allowed as well. Yeah.
But in the Torah, it's stated that you should not allow your servant to do a
Correct.
halakha.
If he's your servant, that's something else. But these people are not our servants. A servant is like a member of your household. That's a bigger problem. That's a bigger problem. You're right. It's not the same thing though. We're talking about a non-Jew who's not yours. It's not yours.
So it's like you cannot ask him to do work. I cannot ask him to wash a plate or this.
Washing a plate is allowed.
Yes.
So you can, just because whatever you can do, you can ask him to do.
To cook?
So no, because cooking is prohibited. So you can't ask a non-Jew to do something prohibited for you. But that's the later chapter. We're going to get into all those details. So let's focus it on the electronic part and burglar alarms. And we started to mention how can you see when you go to the kotel, you see the security system is on. I don't know if you ever noticed, but there's also a sign that says on the security system, this is a special security system designed by the Institute for Halacha and Science. And they have some kind of special arrangement that, like the metal detector you walk through, it buzzes when you go through with a gun or something that's metal that's suspicious. How can you use that on Shabbat? You're going to walk in and you have metal in your buckle or something like that. You're going to activate it. So they have, first of all, there's special allowances because it's for security, for pikuach nefesh. But also they devised the system so that it works in a more indirect way than the usual way. And let's read about it here on page 57. Okay? Idan.
Motion detectors in public domains and in the home. One may walk where security cameras record images of passerby. Since the pedestrian has no interest in being videoed, he is not held responsible for his image being recorded, and there is no prohibition. Similarly, one may pass through a metal detector since one who goes through is not interested in its electrical activity. One may also walk on a street where there are motion detectors that detect the movements of passersby. Even if a security system turns a light on when it senses movement, one may walk past it because he is innocently walking through and is not interested in turning on the light. However, if it is not difficult, it is preferable to use an alternative route, since indirectly causing an electric light to go on is not properly respectful of Shabbat. A private home might have a security system in which the burglar alarm has been disarmed, but the sensors continue working. Consequently, whenever one passes by certain places, LED security lights go on or images are recorded. Some forbid walking around in such a house on Shabbat, since doing so will cause electrical activity. They maintain that if one wishes to walk there, he must either disable the entire system or cover all the sensors so they will not detect a person's movements. Others permit walking there. This is because one simply wishes to walk and has no interest in triggering sensors or having his image captured. The only reason he does not activate them
Deactivate them.
The only reason he does not deactivate them is because it is so difficult to do. This is the primary position. Nevertheless, if possible, it is preferable to disable the sensors.
Okay, here not only does he say this position, is he brings this is Rav Nachum Rabinovich from Siach Nachum, his tshuva book. He says it's the primary position, which I think is a radical move. It's a little surprising that if he thinks that's the primary position, his students, Rav Rabinovich's students, apply it also to what we discussed earlier, to the issue of walking into a hotel room and that the air conditioning and the lights are going to go on. He says, you're just walking in your room. You're not interested in any lights going on. And that the same principle that applies here should apply there. I see that there's a difference because here we're triggering sensors which have no benefit whatsoever to you. It's just, because the alarm system's turned off, because it's just, recording everything. So that's why he's lenient here and not over there, where there's a direct, activation of something that's beneficial. But in principle, he does say that this is the primary position, which has tremendous ramifications, as I was saying earlier. Okay. He goes on to say, as trying to find when is he machmer and when is he not. It's a little bit tricky. Go ahead. One must disable a light.
One must disable a light that automatically turns on when one approaches the entrance to one's home, because he benefits from the light in this case. Even if he does not benefit, it is not properly respectful to Shabbat to cause the light to go on. In a case of need, when the system is activated and there is no other way to enter the house, one can crawl through in such a way that the light might not turn on. Even if it is almost certain that the light will still turn on, turning it on by crawling constitutes a shinui. Additionally, he should keep his eyes closed so that he will not benefit from the light when it goes on.
Again, according to Rabbi Rabinovich and his students, you don't have to do any of this. It's best to turn off the lights for sure. And of course, he's making the distinction between your house and the lights that are turning on for your benefit from walking in the street. Walking in the street, somebody else's house and their own lights. It's for their, you definitely have no interest in giving them light for that, protecting their home. So that he makes you can see though, it's a little bit hard to make these fine distinctions. Even Rav Melamed, who accepts Rav Rabinovich and calls it the primary position, he's still machmer when it comes to your own home, when it comes to lights which are activated, as opposed to just some kind of, meaningless sensors. Like, in the corner of the room, sometimes there's a little motion sensor and there's an LED light, a green light that turns on whenever somebody passes by. That's what he was discussing there. And he says, you could be lenient about that, because that light is for no purpose. It's not causing any help for anybody, and you don't care about it, and all you're doing is walking through. But yet, when you're activating something which is useful, he says you should be machmer. Do it b'shinui. Walk backwards. I don't know. Crawl, or maybe do it in a way which maybe you could, get out of the eyesight of the sensors of the eye. All right. So we're going to continue. We got the basic principles, I think. We talked about even alarms on Shabbat. If it's going to go off automatically, you can be lenient, but let's take a look at. Happens a lot. All these are specific cases that happen. Right? It used to be that the car alarms used to go off every night because it took a while till they got the right sensitivity of the motion sensors. If somebody bumps into the car, sometimes the car there was just some shake because of an animal walked by, then the car alarm would go off. And it's Shabbat. Can you go ahead and deactivate it? It's electronics. But somebody's trying to sleep. That's a mitzvah on Shabbat, and you can't steal people's sleep. It's your car. So this was it still is an issue, but less than it used to. If you do it with a shinui, shvut to shvut, it's only a rabbinical prohibition. There's a word for rabbinic prohibitions on Shabbat. It's called shvut. Shvut, Hebrew word. It's a technical term for rabbinic prohibitions regarding Shabbat. There's rabbinic prohibitions about kashrut. They don't have a name. There's rabbinic prohibitions about the laws of kilayim. There's all sorts of rabbinic prohibitions, but the ones about Shabbat have a special name. They're called shvut. So when you have shvut de shvut, rabbinic prohibition about a rabbinic prohibition, like we said, if you do something in a not normal way, it already is not biblically a biblical violation. It's only a rabbinic violation. Okay, so if you do something in a not normal way, of an activity which itself is a rabbinic prohibition, so that's a double layer of the rabbinic prohibitions, that can be allowed for the sake of a mitzvah, for example, for somebody to sleep on Shabbat. And so some people are more machmir, but in practice, in the great necessity, it says in the bottom, page 60, case of great necessity for the sake of a mitzvah, one may turn off the alarm via shvut de shvut, as he quotes the later poskim, the recent poskim who spoke about this.
But this shavut and grama is different, is it?
No, grama is indirect action. Okay, what about an electric alarm clock goes off on Shabbat? We already talked about it. It's page 61. He says one may not turn it off because you're using electricity. What do? You put blankets on top, or if you don't, he says you may turn off the alarm with a shinui. This follows the principle that a shvut to shvut is permitted for the sake of the mitzvah. It's obviously going to ruin your Shabbat atmosphere if you got this annoying noise which doesn't turn off. So this is why I mentioned that you get a special app which has an alarm clock if you want to use it for the sake of Shabbat. Some people allow it if the alarm's going to go off automatically after 10 seconds. Then there's what's called, there's different types of watches. The biggest question now, I don't think that it's even in the book, the smart watches. And they're measuring your blood pressure. They're measuring, are you wearing one? Binyamin's wearing one now, I think. They're measuring your, all the time, people who will work out or who have the diabetes or something, whatever it is, they're measuring all sorts of things. And then you learn about it for the sake of your health or for fitness or whatever it is. So can you wear that watch on Shabbat? Some people say, well, as long as you're not going to look at the results, you're not going to use the statistics in any way. It's just like the light in the corner of the security camera. And he said the primary position is you can go about your daily life even if you know that, okay, there's some meaningless recording of statistics that's happening. I don't care about it, and I can go about my daily business. There are some poskim who allow that smartwatch, as long as you don't play with it on Shabbat. You're not pushing the buttons, and you don't use the information, then it's fine. But other poskim are more machmir. It's a longer discussion. And
But still,
yeah,
still not allowed to weigh, right, on Shabbat.
To weigh things.
You are still not allowed to weigh this.
Where? Yes.
Digital watch.
A digital watch you are allowed to wear. He says here. The special smart watch.
Yes.
And so Take a look on page 61 in the middle. It says, one may wear an electronic watch that displays the time. Even if there's a computer inside, one may wear it since its primary purpose, displaying the time, is permitted. However, if one knows that one is likely to end up using the computer, he may not wear this watch on Shabbat. Of course, one may not wear a watch that requires him to press a button to see the time. And when I grew up, the first electronic watches came out, and they were LED. You push the button, and then the time came up in red, and then it disappeared after a few seconds. Every time you wanted to tell the time, you had to push a button. So that's not allowed, because you can't. It's not a useful watch unless you press a button, which you don't want to do on Shabbat. But then they came with LCD. That's all the watches we have are LCD, the liquid crystal display, where you can see the time always. So there are smart watches like this, where it stays on, the screen stays on, and you can see the time without pushing any buttons.
Because of your activity, you have to turn it. You turn it down.
So if you have to turn it to activate it, it's a problem, because that turning it is activating it.
Yes.
But if it stays, and there are settings where you can set it to show the time always, so then you can wear it as long as you're not going to push any buttons, and you're not going to use there's a whole computer in there. You could make phone calls. You could do lots of things with smartwatches, but you're not going to do any of that stuff. You're wearing it as a watch. The primary purpose is for the watch, and the rest is it's not considered muktzah anymore. Here you see the next line is, one may not wear a watch that measures the room temperature and displays it, because the movements of the wearer cause the watch to work. Okay? If it's not displayed and you don't care about it, so then again he says it's psikresha de lo nichale, and it's via the grama. You're not actually doing any specific action. Grama is indirect causation. It's not something. Yeah. It's like the normal way is to activate a switch is by pushing it. But let's say I take a ball and I throw it against the wall, at just the right angle so that the ball ends up touching the switch. That's called grama. It's indirect causation. That's what. But that's the next section, section 18. We're going to talk about that. And the reason is because some people said, well, hey, I've actually, this was a big tararam, big discussion just a few years ago. Someone created a light switch. You can put it into your wall, just like a regular light switch. And he said, I'm going to put in there a grama device. When you turn on the lights, when you flick the switch, the lights don't turn on immediately. They activate some kind of a system, even if it's electronic, but it doesn't happen right away. So if there's a delay, then perhaps that's not directly turning on the light. So everybody railed against him and said, you're misunderstanding. That's what Rav Melamed is going to do now. He says, there's also many different systems. That's the way a lot of alarm systems which are used is, for example, let's say you have here many of the alarm systems. So there's a beam, an electric beam, which is constantly sending out this light, and there's a sensor on the other side. So as long as this beam is there, the system is activated. Now, if you put in just a piece of cardboard or a mechanical device that blocks the beam, so then it won't be activated. So you're not actually, to move this in and out, you're not activating electronics. You're just not letting the beam get to where it is. You're not activating the electronics. The electronics are always working, and essentially that maybe that should be allowed. Or you could say the opposite. Let's say the system works when the beam does not reach the receiver. Okay, so the system's working. So, and you want to turn off the system. Sorry. Right. To turn on the system, well, you can't flick the switch to turn on the system. But now all I'm doing is removing the physical barrier. I'm just, it's like, are you allowed to move this on Shabbat? I'm not doing any violation of Shabbat. Oh, there's a beam which is going to get passed through if I move it out of the way. Okay, but I'm just moving something physical. I'm not, so that's another form of grama, indirect causation. I know that if I move the physical barrier out of the way, then the beam is always constantly being projected in that direction. I know that the beam is going to be received, and then that will activate or deactivate the switch. Some people say that's a smart way of activating circuits or deactivating circuits in a way which you're not actually touching the electronics yourself. You're only doing it in an indirect way. So it's grama. Some people say, well, let's put that into a light switch. I'll flick the switch. It looks like a regular light switch. It acts like a regular light switch. But actually, all it's doing is some mechanical activity. So some people say, okay, but that's not good enough, because if that's the normal way to turn the lights on and off, so the grama is insignificant. The fact that inside the circuit works in a specific way, that shouldn't make a difference. Some people say, okay, so we'll add another feature, and that is a time delay. Usually when you turn on the lights, right away, the light goes on. This time you turn on the lights, and the light goes on a minute later. So that's if I'm using a grama switch, and there's a time delay. It's not the normal way, and maybe it's allowed on Shabbat. People worked very hard to create and started to market this device, and they said no longer do you have to worry about having the timer for Shabbat. You can just turn on your lights on Shabbat, turn them off on Shabbat, because you've installed this special system. It'll be a little bit of a delay, a minute later, I don't know, 30 seconds, whatever it is, but who really cares whether it's 30 seconds later? We're used to that, convenience, but anyways, Rabbi Menachem is going to say here, can't do that. You can't do that. If it turns into, and if it's too similar to the normal way the activity is done, like flicking on the switch, then that overrides all these complicated systems of grama and so forth. Let's read it inside section 63. Now, before I say that, I think his bottom line is these systems are very, very important, and we do utilize them, but not for your convenience, to be able to turn the lights on and off in your living room. We use them for the sake of somebody who is sick, or somebody is homebound and will be depressed if he's not able to get around. You've probably seen these little golf carts that people drive on Shabbat. And says on the back, was a big sign. It says, this is a special motor. Don't think I'm violating the Shabbat. This is designed by the Institute for Halacha and Science, whatever you want. There's a few of them. And it uses grama. And there's many different, some of them, for example, they have the cart always, the motor is actually always on. The whole Shabbat. And that way, so what happens when you push the gas pedal or push the throttle, whatever it is, that just increases the current and decreases the current. That, we said, according to many poskim, is allowed, because you're not completing the circuit. You're not starting off, you're not building anything. You're just increasing the current, and that can be allowed. So that's why a lot of these systems are utilized for the sake of the elderly, for the sake of medical devices and so forth, but not for turning the lights on in your home. And that's already taking it to the extreme. Because once it's you have to let's see what he says about grandma. Go ahead. Top of page 63. Shmuel, will you read it for us?
Grandma solutions to halachic problems on Shabbat. Several organizations specialize in halacha and technology, devoting themselves to engineering electrical appliances to turn on via grammar, so that they may be used in cases of need. One such method is called removing an impediment. Hasarat Hamoneh.
This is what I just described to you, that you have a um, mechanical device which is preventing the beam from reaching its sensor, and if you can activate it just by removing that impediment, you're not actually turning it on. It turns it itself on as soon as you remove the block, the impediment. Okay, go ahead. That's one method. Yeah.
Second method uses a type of scanner that performs a scan every few seconds. It turns on an appliance if it determines turns an appliance on if it determines that the switch has been flipped. Thus, flipping the switch does not turn on the appliance, but only causes it to be turned on indirectly.
Right. So you flip the switch. It doesn't actually turn the machine on when you flip the switch. It's only because there's a cycle of that's checking to see if the switch has been flipped, and that cycles on automatically every 30 seconds. So the next time it checks, it'll notice that the switch, which does nothing, it was flipped. Then it'll do something. So you're not doing anything. It's because there's a cycle that's checking whether something has been done earlier. That's a similar concept. Grama, indirect causation. Go ahead. Third method.
A third method is based on the principle that one may extend the present state. The appliance is set to turn on for 1 second every few seconds. When the switch is flipped, the next time the appliance turns on, it will turn on.
It will not turn off.
After a second, but it will remain activated.
That's a nice system, right? Because you're not really turning anything on at all. Essentially, the machine turns itself on automatically. What your flipping the switch does is it enables the feature that the machine. See, they're very ingenious methods of grama. Others maintain, however.
Others maintain that one may not use any of these clever stratagems. If an appliance is said to be activated electronically, causing its activation is not considered grammar, but the normal way of activating it. In practice, it would seem that if one's action causes an appliance to turn on within a short time, like it would be turned on during the week, then even if the appliance has been programmed to turn on in a grammar-like way, one may not turn it on. The internal workings of the machine are not important, and if it turns on in a way that looks normal, then it is not considered grammar. Therefore, elevators and automatic doors may not be turned on by grammar, since the goal is for them to function in a normal way as soon after being turned on. It would not be considered grammar. Similarly, one may not travel using Kalmoid, an electric wheelchair, or
Golf. Should be golf cart.
Specifically designed for use by the sick, disabled, and elderly on Shabbat, since it operates in a way that one would operate a similar device during the week. In contrast, when one's action causes an appliance to turn on only with a significant delay, then if it is brought about indirectly, whether by Hasarat Hamoneh, scanning, or extending the present state, it is considered grammar, and such a system may be used when needed. This is the practice regarding arming a security system. If turning a key will cause the system to work by grammar, and it will only actually arm itself 10 minutes after the key is turned, it is considered grammar, and one may do so in cases of great need.
Right. Okay. It's Shabbat. At night, you're at home. You don't want your security system on. You're home. You feel safe, but then you want to go to shul in the morning. And you live in a neighborhood where if you leave the door open and without any security system, you could get robbed out of house and home. So when you leave the house, you want to turn on the security system. Or when you go to sleep at night, some people put on the security system, but then you want to deactivate it in the morning, or deactivate it when you come home from shul, from synagogue. How can you do that? It's Shabbat. We don't want to play with electronics. So they create these systems that are grama, indirect causation, in one of the three methods mentioned. And because there's a long time delay, it turns off or turns on only after 10 minutes, then the custom is that we rely on them. And as you've seen around, there are some places where the rabbis allow, for the sake of the disabled or elderly, to use these cars, these golf carts. Kalnuit, they call them, it's a cute name. But, the problem is little kids want to hitch a ride. Or some people, I've seen around my issue, people buy them for convenience. They only have one car. Let's say the wife goes out to work every day, uses the car. But the husband lives and he works at home or whatever it is. He wants to go to the Makolet. Now, it's a big yishuv. It could be a 15-minute walk to go to the Makolet. If he has a scooter, it's great. Or, instead of a scooter, if he wants to be able to take children in his wake, so you have a little golf cart. So people have golf carts for their own private use, even if it's not for elderly or something like that. These are useful little buggies of various kinds. And of course, the electric scooters have become very popular. Can you just say, okay, I'll put a grama switch on my electric scooter or on my golf cart, and I'll use it on Shabbat? No, that's what Rav Melamed is very clear about, that those who allow it, and even these institutes who create these grama switches for such devices, they say it's only for the sake of medical need or security forces. Security forces usually can violate the Shabbat because it's pikuach nefesh, but sometimes, when you're in the police force, it's not always danger to life, but there has to be police force out there, so we try to minimize as much as possible. So there are sorts of grama switches. There's a doctor that they make a pen. You have to write, you do your rounds, a nurse has to record all the vitals and whatever it is. It's not saving a life necessarily. It's important. You have to do it for the long term. But so they created this pen that is disappearing ink after 24 hours. So you can write with this pen on Shabbat. We said one of the 5 conditions of intentional work, of Melechet Machshevet, is that it's permanent writing. This is not permanent. It's going to disappear within 24 hours. Motzei Shabbat, you make Havdalah, you use a regular pen and you write in on top of what you wrote, all the vital signs or whatever things you had to write. You can write it again with a regular pen. But on Shabbat, you try to minimize as much as possible. Shav et, they call it Shabbat et, like a pen for Shabbat. Sometimes somebody who is in the army or doing a security guard is to write down every license plate that comes in and out. We have to have security on Shabbat, but that writing down of their license plates, how important is that? So that in those kind of use, and it's not going to delay, it's not going to harm the security in any way if he writes it within disappearing ink, and then Ma'atzei Shabbat he writes it over again. Let's say they have to have a record of who went in, who went out. It's important for security reasons. That's why they do it. But if you can, do it with minimizing the violation of Shabbat, some people say this is best. This is a larger question, which we're going to talk about soon. We're going to skip ahead because we really have to try to finish soon. One second. This is a larger consideration when you talk about security things or medical needs on Shabbat if you're trying to save a life. There are 2 basic approaches to this, which we're going to learn, and that is most people assume that we should try to still minimize Shabbat violation as much as possible. Other approaches say, no, Shabbat, if you're dealing with pikuach nefesh, it's as if there's no Shabbat. It's as if you're in a weekday. So you don't have to try to minimize the amount of violation of Shabbat. So this is there is such an approach. Of course, that makes things much easier. But most poskim try not to go there. And therefore, this concept of trying to minimize using this fancy pen or grandma switches, even in all sorts of communication devices. There's all sorts of devices which are being created. And if it's for the sake of security or medical needs, then it makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, if it's just for your convenience, we try to stay away from it. Yes?
Some rabbi told that it's fine if you have like the detective device that sees that a human is in the room, so that once a human is coming into the room, the lights is turning on. But I think that's not fine because you turning them on by your
It's such a
presence.
shame. It's such a shame that you weren't here for the first half of the class, because that's what we talked about
Sorry.
at length. But you can read about it in the book, the beginning of chapter 17. We discussed that at length, and we saw two basic approaches. First approach is that we try to avoid it, if possible. The other approach is, as long as you're going about your daily activities without any care about activating anything, then it can be allowed. Rav Melamed in the end only allows it when it's insignificant sort of recording of statistics that goes on, but if it's going to actually be activating lights, he's more machmir about it. But it's becoming more and more practical, right? Many more buildings are built with sensors that activate the lights when you walk in the room, or the air conditioning goes on when you walk in the hotels. They save money that way, and so it's a problem regarding Shabbat. We try to avoid it if possible. Go to the low-tech hotels, or sometimes if you ask them, they can actually deactivate the system. Best to build it ahead of time for a Shabbat with a Shabbat mode. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome, no problem. Okay, so, yeah. Another question, yeah.
The pen and security guard what do we have? Forgot now. This is like, they have to work because it's like hook nefesh.
Yes, exactly.
But
not everything they do is really saving the life, so if there is a way to delay or to, do only the vital activities or to minimize the Chilul Shabbat in those activities, maybe we should try to. That's what we're going to get to soon. I think we're going to skip chapter 18. We already talked about it just now, about writing and erasing. We try to not... I just have to give you one image, which I want you to stick with you to teach you the laws of writing and erasing. Question comes, can you have birthday cake on Shabbat?
Sure.
Happy birthday. Why not? It's a great time to celebrate birthdays. The problem is, what do you have on a birthday cake? Candles? For sure, that's not going to be on Shabbat. But you have letters. It's written, Happy Birthday, Michael, or, Mazal Tov to Gershon, whatever it is, right? And you write something, or you have a nice heart. And then what do?
Cut into it.
You cut into it. You're breaking up the letters. You're breaking up the words. You're erasing the writing. Are you allowed to do that on Shabbat or not?
It's food.
It's food, still.
Not the usual way, like with your fingers, for example.
Yeah, very impolite. Your mother won't be happy with you, but maybe God will. It's an interesting suggestion. So take a look. It's a very interesting discussion on page 68. One may not cut through letters that are written on a cake in a frosting, candy, or the like. Similarly, if the cake is decorated with a meaningful picture, and nowadays you can have your face photographed and put it on the cake. And it's edible.
Rice paper.
Yeah. One may not cut through the picture. Even though one's intention in cutting the cake is to eat it, since the letters or pictures have meaning, it is very clear that they're being erased when the cake is cut. It's rabbinically prohibited. However, one may cut between the letters. So, happy birthday, right? So, H can be one piece of cake, A is another piece of cake, P is another, right? Okay? Because even though this separates a word into the component parts, one does not violate mochek as long as each letter remains whole. Therefore, if a cake that one plans to serve on Shabbat is being decorated, it should be done in such a way that one will be able to cut between the letters and pictures. Afterwards, the slices of cake may be eaten. I mean, you could take a bite, even though you're erasing the A or the H, because you're eating, and you're in the. That's not considered mochek. But there's another type of cookie. You know what was the most popular cookie in Israel for years? Still is very popular and very cheap.
Oh, what's it called? The rectangular.
Yes, rectangular tea cookies.
Yeah.
They're called petit bear. If you go to the store in Hebrew, it's written petit bear. Why? It's French. French means
Small bear.
no, a little bit of butter. I think.
Ah.
Bear is an abbreviation, which I think it means a little bit of butter. So they're butter cookies. They were originally, but of course they don't make them with butter usually. But what's unique about these cookies is the word in French, petit bear, is engraved inside the cookie. It's not icing written on top like a birthday cake, but it's actually engraved inside the cookie. So can you eat that cookie? Can you break it in half? So he says, when letters or pictures appear on cookies as a result of having been stamped into the cookie dough, as with petit bear cookies, there's no prohibition against cutting or breaking them, since these letters have no significance. Erasing them incidentally is not prohibited. So we see a nice distinction between the letters which are separate from the food, the main food, and they're like icing. So that's like a separate writing that you should try to avoid erasing, except if you're taking a bite. With the petit bear type of cookies where it's engraved, then it's more lenient, and you can. There's even here, sometimes people write. Nobody did it here. They write their names on the edge of them. How can you open the book? You're breaking the letters. It's a problem. So if there's no other book available, he says one may read such a book because you're not really intending to it. And but the biggest problem about writing and erasing on Shabbat is packaging. Right, we spoke about it the other day. When you open up the packaging, has letters written all over it, right? How much it costs, what the ingredients are. When you open up the package, you're going to be erasing the letters. So he says on the top of page 69, lechatchila, it is proper to be stringent. But when there's no way to open the package without tearing letters, one may be lenient. One who opens the package has no interest in erasing the letters, and the action is not constructive, but destructive. So for those reasons, it's not going to be a biblical prohibition, probably not even a rabbinic prohibition. Okay, there's a lot of details here, but that's writing and erasing, something to be aware of. There's other activities involved with textiles, and dyeing is prohibited. We talked about it when we talked about makeup, right? You're not allowed to dye your face with makeup that's going to stick.
Puzzles, Mark, and jigsaws?
What does he say? See, take a look. Colorful blocks, if you look on page 70, second last paragraph, colorful blocks may be put next to each other to form a letter, and thread may be laid down in the shape of letters because the blocks or threads already exist. When simply arranging them, you could put, juxtapose two cards together to form a picture, letter, or word, because they already exist. This applies when the different parts do not connect to each other or to a board. Right? Like the game of Scrabble. The game of Scrabble, there's like little tiles with the letters on them. You grew up playing that, I assume, right? Me too. And good, teaches you language, teaches you spelling. It's wonderful. Can you play that on Shabbat? So here, it's like the difference between the birthday cake and the petit bear cookies. There's two types of Scrabble. Most of the boards, it's just a flat board, which have drawn on it squares, double letter score, triple letter score, and so forth. but when you put the tile on the board, it doesn't snap into place. There's deluxe Scrabble, which has for each square has like a little frame in it, and you actually place the tile into the frame, and it's set in place. They say that deluxe Scrabble is prohibited because it's called like writing. You're actually setting it in place. Whereas if you're just putting one tile next to each other, it's allowed. So from here, now I ask you, Shmuel, what about jigsaw puzzles? Is that allowed?
No.
That's what he says at the bottom, page 70. One may not assemble jigsaw puzzles since creating meaningful pictures also constitute kotev. However, others permit. Meaning they are not considered writing since all the writing already exists. The activity merely brings the letters or puzzle pieces into proximity. Even according to the lenient position, one may not complete a jigsaw puzzle in order to preserve it as a portrait. So the idea is a jigsaw puzzle is meant to be built and disassembled. Assemble it and disassemble it over and over again. That's the game. Sometimes people actually keep their jigsaw puzzles and put them on the wall. That's more of a problem because you're actually creating writing. In practice, those who wish to be lenient allow their children may, but it's best for adults to be stringent. Again, that's if they're going to be stuck to each other in some way. But if you're just, playing with cards, putting them next to each other, or tiles, that's allowed. Okay.
Multiple combination lock?
Yeah. I want to skip and you keep trying to get all the details. But combination like is you turn the dial, you can use that. You're not really writing anything. You're just putting the gears in the right space. You can, yeah. But nowadays, if you buy a safe, I just bought a safe for my new gun, right? You have to have a safe. That's the law. So it's digital. I said, oh my God, what am I going to do on Shabbat? I mean, carry it on me for the whole Shabbat. What if I want to, take a break? So I figured it out. It comes with a manual key as well. I tried it out. It works with a manual key. So on Shabbat, I'll use the manual key. And during the week, I use a digital combination. So, anyways, all right. Let's move ahead. We're going to go to not even chapter 19. We're going to skip that as well. We're going to go to the most important chapters so that we don't get stuck. We're going to skip chapter 20 as well. And yes?
Question.
Yes?
Somehow is the
Balloons with numbers on them.
the Shabbat they cannot move.
So a good question, yeah. But like we saw, if they're not set in place, then they're considered separate. And you can take two cards, one says a 2 and one says a 1, and put them together. Same thing with balloons. I think you can put them next to each other. No problem moving the balloons if they're not set, in a structure, in a form. Okay, so that's allowed, yeah. We talked about earlier, can you blow up such a balloon? The problem is, blowing up the balloon might be a problem because you're forming the balloon for the first time. But if you say, okay, it was pre-made that way, it's already, you're not creating anything, the problem would be tying the knot at the end to keep the air inside. Tying a knot is another one of the malachot that you're not allowed to do. So, yes. Yeah, if you had a plastic clip, great. Like the kinds that you get with on a bread bag, right? They come with a plastic clip. Maybe that's good enough for a balloon. I don't know. It'd have to be pretty tight. I don't know. Anyways, okay, so we're going to skip ahead. And we might come back, hopefully, to agriculture and malachot. We have to worry about, you don't pick off leaves, fruit from the tree on Shabbat, and we don't water plants on Shabbat. That's why some people don't know better, and they're a guest for a Shabbat meal, and they bring a nice potted plant. The person who's learned the lachot, he says, what do I do with this now? Because even though the plant is potted, if it has holes on the bottom, halacha considers that to be connected to the ground. And so you can't lift it off the ground or put it down on the ground because it's like you're planting it in the ground or you're removing it. In any case, it's complicated. We don't mess around with potted plants. Cut flowers, you can move them for the sake of, but we won't get into all those details now. I want to make sure we have time for the most important halachot, which is even chapter 20. We're going to come back to that. 21 we're going to come back to. And 22 we're going to come back to. I want to skip ahead. 23 we're going to skip. Also, Muktzah, though, it's very practical. I want to get to the most important chapter about sick people and saving lives. That's chapter 27. To make sure we don't run out of time, we have to do chapter 27 and chapter 28. Okay, chapter 27 and 28 is what we're going to deal with next. And all these other chapters, we're going to come back to them. Look to page 235. And the truth is, why am I doing this? It's for my own sake. It's for me. Why? The Talmud says that if a student comes to his teacher and asks them on Shabbat, can I do this activity or not because there's danger to life, you know who's guilty? The teacher, the rabbi. It should be so clear. The rabbi has to make it so clear to his students that if there's any danger to life, you don't ask any questions, you do it. That pikuach nefesh overrides keeping Shabbat. So for my own sake, I want to make sure that we learn these laws carefully. So I am not guilty. Not for your sake, but for my sake. But of course we have to know the laws and where does this apply and when does this not apply, what's considered a danger to life and so forth. And there's basically, we're going to see it, that there's actually 3 types of sickness, halachically. I mean, obviously there's millions of types of sickness. I'm saying that there are 3 categories of how sick you need to be. And there's different rules in halacha for these 3 basic categories. What are they? One is called pikuach nefesh. Obviously, danger to life. Or even, we're going to see that even safek pikuach nefesh. Even if there's a doubtful danger to life, that's category number 1. Category number 2 is, you're sick. You may be even very sick. You have fever, you need to lie down. You're really in pain, tremendous pain. But you're not going to die. There's no danger to your life. You're suffering tremendously. That's category number 2. That's called chole sick, she'ein bo sakana. The first one is chole sheyesh bo sakana, a sick person who has actually danger to his life. Second one is, you can be very, very sick. It's still ein bo sakana. There's no danger to your life. That's category number 2. And category number 3 is, it's not even called chole. It's called feeling not well. Michush be'alma. It's just not feeling well. Now, that's a lot. Most of the cases when we take medicines nowadays is for somebody who's just not feeling well. Usually you're not lying in bed, wreathing in pain. You have a headache. Or, ouch, you got injury. There's no danger to your life. It's painful for a few seconds and then it goes by. But still it can be painful. So what are the laws halachically for these 3 categories? That's what we're going to learn. Bezrat Hashem in chapter 27, chapter 8. Okay, so far so good? By way of introduction. Let's begin. But before we begin, we should pray for the hostages and for the soldiers and for other Jewish people who are under attack. So if we could bring out our Sidurim. Page 231. Do you want to bring your violin or you want to sing with us today?
It'll take me a second.
Take a second. It'll take us a second to get the books. Yesterday we did with the recording. Today we'll do it live. Thank you. 231. It's good for you to practice your Hebrew reading too, right?
Machon.
No. If I taught you nothing else other than this song and how to read these Hebrew words, Dayenu. What does Acheinu mean?
Our brother.
Our brothers, right? Ach shelanu, Acheinu. Acheinu kol Beit Yisrael. We know what that means, right? Hanetunim latet, who they are in. It's the passive. They are within tzara and shivya. Tzara is distress. Shivya is captivity. Yes.
What did they put in the bus? Something?
Many times I saw a few different slogans being used nowadays. The most common one I think is Yachad Nenatzeach. Together we will be victorious. Trying to remind us to be united so that we don't fight with ourselves, fight against them. So united we will be victorious. Yachad Nenatzeach. I saw that, the billboards with the Israeli flag and stuff like that.
You have Shema Israel on the side of
Shema
the
Israel, I saw on the side of the building. It's amazing, amazing
So
people.
at Malcha they had like, I forget which Chag it was, they had like, from Chabad, they had like big psukim, it was really, really nice.
Nice.
Okay, it was-
Nice. Yafa, yeah. Anyway, so Acheinu, our brothers, Kol Beit Yisrael, all of the house of Israel, Hanetunim, that are given over to, right? Latet is to give. So here it's the passive. They are given over into be tzara or ba tzara uva shivya. Ha'omdim. What's omdim? End of the first line. Ha'omdim
They are
bein bayam uvein bayabasha. What's la'amod? To stand. So they are standing bein bayam uvein bayabasha. We don't know where the hostages are. They could be in the ocean, whether in the ocean or on land. Wherever they are. Hamakom, we said, is the name we use for God. Hamakom yerachem alehem. What's rachmanut? What's lerachem?
No, that's wrong.
Rachamim, mercy. Good. That's right. Hashem should have mercy on them and lead them from Yotziem, Leotzi. What's Leotzi? We're going to learn the laws of Hotza'ah on Shabbat. What's Leotzi?
to bring out.
To bring out. Yotziem, Hashem should take them out. Mitzara. Tzara. What is tzara? We just said it in the first line. What's tzara?
Distress.
Distress. He should take them out of distress. Li. What's the opposite of distress? Revacha. Revacha means relief. There's a government arm called Misrad HaRevacha, the Ministry of Relief. Welfare. We say in English welfare, but in Hebrew it's Revacha. Ready? Acheinu kol bet Yisrael. Acheinu kol bet Yisrael. Hanetunim atzara, b'tzara ubeshivya. Omdim bein bayam uvein bayam ashor. Again. Acheinu kol bet Yisrael. Acheinu kol bet Yisrael. Anetunim b'tzara, b'tzara ubeshivya. Omdim bein bayam vein bayam bashar. Hamakom yerachem aleihem v'yotzihem mitzara li'avacha u'meyafela le'ora u'mishiabu לגאולה השתה בגלה ובזמן כהריב במקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה לקרחה ומייפלה לאורה ומשעבוד לגאולה השתה בגלה ובזמן קבברי. This may be the first song that you know in Aramaic, because the last few words are Aramaic. Hashta means now, ba'agala, swiftly, ubizman kariv. But you know those words already from the Kaddish. The Kaddish prayer is in Aramaic, and that's, what do we say? At the end, Ehei shlama rabba min shemaya, chaim tovim aleinu, al kol Yisrael. No, so where's the hashta? Does it say? Before? Yeah? יתקדע ויתקדע שמי רבה במעט, דיווח יותר ומלך וחוטא, חייכון ומכון וחי לכל ישראל, בעגלה, it doesn't say hashta, it says בעגלה ובזמן קריב, swiftly and soon. זמן קריב, it's like Hebrew, זמן קרוב, a close time coming. So you know some Aramaic? All right, excellent. Thank you, Idan. Seder. Okay. Principles of Pikuach Nefesh. Pikuach Nefesh. Okay? We have to do what we can to save a life. Saving a life overrides Shabbat. As the Torah states, page 235 in the Rav Melamed's book, Laws of Shabbat, volume 2. Keep my decrees and laws, which a person shall do and live by. I am the Lord. The sages expound, live by and not die by. Mitzvah of the Torah were given so that people may live by them and not die to fulfill them. What? You're not dedicated to God? I guess we're not jihadists. Right? We're definitely not going to try to die. Definitely not going to try to kill other people. Quite the opposite. There actually is one exception. If you look in the footnote number 1, saving a life overrides all mitzvot with the exception of the 3 cardinal sins: idolatry, murder, and sexual transgressions. Concerning these 3, and only these 3, the rule is one should be killed and not transgress. By the way, the rule is not one should kill and not transgress. You have to allow oneself to be killed, but you can never murder someone else. Murder is one of the 3. Even if someone puts a gun to your head, as if you don't kill someone else, I'm going to kill you, you have to give up your life. You cannot kill them. Unless, of course, why are we going to war and trying to kill people? Because we're saving a life. But if it's a question of my life versus his life, the Talmud says, is my blood redder than his? You cannot choose one life over the other. And so, if you're trying to defend the innocent, that's one thing. That's what the IDF, right? Israel Defense Forces is trying to save all of us from being slaughtered by these barbarians who are our neighbors, who have this murderous theology, and the death wish on top of it. So we have a big fight ahead of us. But in normal circumstances, with normal people, of course, murder is one of the 3 most severe sins in the Torah, together with idolatry and adultery. It's just a useful word to use. It refers to all sorts of sexual transgressions. Those, you have to give up your life and not transgress. Again, if somebody comes and puts a gun to your head, and unfortunately for hundreds and hundreds of years, Jews, they didn't have guns to their head, but they had knives and swords to their head. When the Crusaders came and said, worship or die, Jews with tremendous dedication gave up their lives not to worship an idol. We're soon, we're going to be talking about Hanukkah, the rebellion of Matityahu and his sons, who the tradition tells us that's how the rebellion started. He was not willing to. They wanted to bow down to the Greek idols. They went around forcing all the Jews to become Hellenists and bow down to the Greek gods. And we went to war not to give in. That's the law. That these sins, we have to give up our lives and be killed and not to violate them. But every other mitzvah in the Torah, all 610, I guess, all 610, it's actually a few less because the sexual sins include a number of mitzvot. Murder is just one, but also idolatry. There's a few, you're not allowed to bow down to them, you're not allowed to make the idols, and other sorts of variations on the theme. But approximately 600 mitzvot, most of the mitzvot of the Torah, someone puts a gun to your head and says, eat pork. You eat the pork. Or, you save your life. If you need to get to the hospital or you're going to die, you hop into the car and you drive the car, even if it's not an electric car and it's a combustion engine. And you're lighting a fire. It says in the Torah, do not light a fire. But it also says in the Torah, I gave you these laws to live by them and not die by them. And so, saving a life overrides Shabbat and all the mitzvot of the Torah, except for these three big ones, which are exceptions to the rule. Yes?
On Shabbat, people have been evacuating Jews from Ukraine because they say they breaking one Shabbat to let them celebrate many Shabbats.
Good. There's another rationale mentioned in the Talmud, in addition to this verse, which we started with, that is, giving you the laws to live by, not to die by. So if there's any danger to life, of course you can violate that. There's the other reasoning brought by the Talmud is that sometimes you violate the Shabbat to save someone, because if you save him, they will keep Shabbat next week, and then the next week, and the next week, and the next week. So you're really violating the Shabbat in order to keep the Shabbat. Shabbat itself will be kept 100 times over. So there is this rationale that the motivation here is in order to increase the observance of Shabbat. Thank you. Yes, but by all means, evacuation from a war zone is saving a life, and crazy. So much. Fortunately, a lot of Jews in Ukraine in danger, and even the Jews in Russia. Many of them tried to escape, are still trying to escape, because the Russians are forcing draft. And
we're heading to a bad place with Russia. We're going to lose our relations with Russia.
Why?
There's Iran, Hezbollah, China.
The Russians chose their sides, and they're more and more. They're with Iran, and
I just said this on camera, but maybe they hacked us on the 7th of October with Iran. We had no
I don't like conspiracy theories until you have something to go on here. The main thing is the Russians are not hindering us from activity in Syria. We've been bombing in Syria for years now, even though Syria is all under Russian purvey. Up till now, every time we've been informing the Russians. You should know we're about to attack here, attack there, and they've been letting us. Apparently with this war in the last month, that is broken down, and we're just doing whatever we think we need to do, and with that, we're not even telling the Russians. So the distance between Israel and Russia is growing. Hopefully it's a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of Jews in Russia that could suffer. So it's complicated business.
We're hoping them to get rid of the terrorists.
Russia.
Yes, yeah, of course there is.
Attacking Syria.
All right. Well, It's complicated. We won't get into it. We have to stop here for today. We're going to continue with chapter 27 and 28, Bezrat Hashem tomorrow, and then into next week too, into Bezrat Hashem.